A few years ago, I had a friend of mine who I would talk to pretty regularly, and we don't really keep in contact anymore. He ended up moving, but he had been dating a girl, and she was his fiance. They were about to get married, and I remember she had wanted him to buy her this 3 carat emerald cut diamond engagement ring from Tiffany. And this was at the time he was 25 years old, working as a post grad, making around $60,000 a year, living in an apartment, splitting the rent. This ring is, by the way, worth around $70,000, a 3 carat natural diamond emerald cut ring from Tiffany. Not taking into account, like I mentioned, the factors of him being 25 years old, him working for $60,000 a year, thinking that he would miraculously be able to afford, or think it would even be appropriate to ask for a wedding ring that is more than his yearly salary. So again, not living in reality. Not taking into account the cost of living in this city we're in, where we're talking five, I think now almost $6 a gallon gas. The cost of groceries, the cost of living, the cost of rent. What he ended up doing was getting her a lab-grown diamond for around $4,000, and he was actually taking out payments on that. And when she had found out, she threw a fit with him. She didn't break up with him, as he should have quite frankly done with her, but she made a big deal out of it. And really, here's the problem, is that I saw this is actually a really good comment I saw in another video, saying that essentially the support beams of society have been hit with a sledgehammer, and you wonder why society is crumbling. You wonder why things are seemingly falling apart. You try to be a good person nowadays, and you try to do the right thing, and you just get walked all over. For that woman, and I don't want to make the whole video about that, but for her to think of course, that it would even be okay to ask for that. But to not understand the sentimental value in something like that makes me realize that there's a bigger problem. Things not having soul or meaning anymore, or purpose anymore, or love or care. Incentive to date and get married really at an all-time low. But I even remember, I'm sure most of us growing up, we probably remembered Star Wars, if it was at some point, whether you were younger and grew up with the prequels or you were older and grew up with the original trilogy. But you remember its impact on movies and stuff like that. And around 10 years ago, it had been bought out, and they started releasing now more Star Wars movies that didn't need to happen, sequels that did not need to happen, media that did not need to happen, and it just lost its prestige is the right word, but just lost its charm, lost its love, its care, its reason. And that's what's happened to so many things nowadays. Of course, other movies and stuff, the same problem, where they're just releasing sequels that don't need to happen. But when it comes to men's incentive, when it comes to family, when it comes to marriage, I've talked about divorce courts, family courts, completely ruining men's lives. Even I was reading an article about a father who had split custody of his son. And this father was working very hard, manual labor, a back-breaking job in construction and with heavy machinery. And he actually injured his back to where he could not work, and he could not afford to pay child support because he was out of work. So they ended up seizing what he had, ended up putting him in jail for not paying child support. How is he supposed to pay child support with the injury? Obviously, now how is he supposed to pay child support in jail? You have so many men who are being done wrong like that. And you have so many people who don't even know that these kind of things exist. And just to kind of put it into perspective, I remember I had a speeding ticket a while back, and this was when we were having some pretty hectic kind of weather in the city. And I remember I had sent by mail, the kind of request, a revision, and have stuff done with the ticket. And it never got through. It was lost in fulfillment. And then I got another ticket in the mail saying how the ticket's overdue and stuff like that. So I'd gone to the courthouse to take care of it. And I remember when I had gone there, or when I had gotten to the courthouse, they gave me a response essentially saying that my license will be suspended by a certain day. And so I asked for a time to have a hearing and stuff like that. And they scheduled the hearing after the suspension date. knowing that, basically saying so they could set me up to where if I drive around now, I'm in trouble. There's something totally wrong with that. And that keep in mind, that's just a speeding ticket. That's something on a much smaller scale than a divorce and a custody battle. And even when I had gone to the courthouse, I remember it almost reminded me of school or elementary school, for example, because, I mean, every employee there was female. And I remember the feeling of sitting down in this room, staring at the clock. There's this kind of just silence in the air and this very strange vibe. If you guys have felt it, you know what I'm talking about. But almost like there's a disdain towards you or towards a man, or that something just feels very off about the whole process. And a point I want to make here is that I hold men accountable. I've held men accountable in videos when I've talked about friendships and stuff like that. I've known men who have knowingly gotten with women who are married or in relationships looking over red flags. And I hold men accountable for that. I've cut many friends off in my life. But that same accountability needs to be held for women, needs to be held for these kind of circumstances. Because men are being beaten down into silence and afraid to speak out against these kind of things. When they do try to speak out, they're being manipulated in some kind of way. Like even, and I understand that there are two sides to everything, but you're not going to tell me when something is objectively wrong, when something is being used to wrongfully ruin someone's life or attempt to destroy their life, that there's any other position that is going to justify that. It doesn't make any sense. Even with friends nowadays, they're more problematic than ever. They're really more problematic than ever. When you don't have brotherhood, when you don't have real camaraderie, and then you're shamed a lot of the time for not having a big friend circle, when a lot of these people don't even know what a real healthy friendship even looks like. A friend is not just someone who likes and acknowledges your story on Instagram. A friend is not someone who pushes negative influences on you and tries to get you to go to raves and nightclubs and those kind of places on the weekend. That's not what a real friend is. A perfect example with the lack of honesty, with the lack of trust in more than just relationships and dating is there was someone that I had talked to for a number of months, and he had said that he had some apartment that he was going to let me move into. And this apartment was, ultimately too good to be true for the cost of living here in the city I'm in. But I remember a couple days before I was going to move in, now what he made it sound like was that he owned the apartment, so it was a condo, right? So he owned it, and that he was going to be moving and living on his own somewhere, and wanting me to pay this amount that was a really good price. And out of nowhere, 2 days before I was supposed to move in, he texts me saying how, oh, and by the way, there's a $550 a month HOA fee, and you're going to be paying for that. And so after that, I told him, I said, hey, this is just not going to work. And I didn't sign anything, luckily. He was going to let me do it month by month, which again is not, the norm here. But I ended up not doing that. What I came to find out was he did not own that apartment. He did not own the condo. He wasn't moving out. He didn't have all this money and all this kind of stuff like he claimed to put on some image, which I don't care if someone has money or not. That's not what I base my interaction with him off of. But he was wanting me to stay there and pay his rent basically so he could stay there and live for free. He had no plans to move out. I did the math on what it would have cost with what I would have been paying initially, which was $400, which in the city I'm in is a steal, and the supposed $550 HOA fee. That would have been the cost of the rent. He was trying to take advantage of me, and I caught it right then and there. It was super obvious. Again, even leading up to the thing, I felt wrong. And that's the thing I will say. When it comes to marriage, when it comes to friendships, when it comes to relationships, if there's something in your gut telling you that it's wrong, if you have a bad feeling or you see especially blatant red flags, just walk away. That's the best thing you can do, is walk away. Because, of course, like I've mentioned, like I said, holding men accountable, is that I've seen many times where men overlook red flags and it backfires in relationships and plenty of other things. But with that, I cut this friend off. I held him accountable for trying to lie to me, for trying to be dishonest. I told a story in a previous video a while back about a mechanic who tried taking advantage of me, trying to say that there was a blown head gasket on my Jeep when he really just drained the coolant, that it was overheating and I was able to fill the coolant and it was totally fine. Trying to get me to pay a lot of money in repair. I held that mechanic accountable. I do not go back there. I called them about it and talked to them about it and explained to them that. When it comes to a lot of the way, or really when it comes to women in society, and I see the way that women act, they're not being held accountable because for some reason, there's this notion that it is empowering for women to act really in just a way that's completely unacceptable. The way women act and dress nowadays is just not, it's totally wrong. And I remember when I was in high school and before that, there was dress codes in the school. And then around the time that I had graduated high school, there was this big push of this kind of female empowerment, and women should be able to wear what they want to wear without worrying about being catcalled. And with that, the moral decay just followed when it came to dating. It just went completely downhill. Like I said, dating apps have been around, or I've talked about dating apps have been around for some time, and they were still no good. But you look on them now, and it's just a joke. It's a complete joke. And you ask yourself, like, who is going to want to marry women like that? Who's going to be able to take women like that seriously? And even with something too, I want to mention with that is this notion that, like, when I see, for example, a family, a seemingly healthy family, where the mother has respect for the father, and if they're maybe out in public and they're walking the kid in a stroller or something like that, that's an amazing thing to see. But in order for there to be family, in order for there to be marriage, there's going to have to be decent women. There's going to have to be women that understand that these kind of things are wrong. If you're behaving in that way, which I see a lot of women, especially under the age of 30, 35, behaving that way, you're not going to have marriage. And then you look at the divorce rates and you wonder why. You look at all this kind of stuff. It just doesn't add up. And then even worse now, you have boys growing up feeling like there's something wrong with them. I remember when I was in high school, freshman year of high school, I had a deck of cards in class that I was just had in my hand. I was a quiet kid back then, but just minding my own business. And this teacher took that deck of cards, and this was also a class that was shared with kind of wood shop and stuff like that they had in other points of the day. And he had put the deck of cards through a buzzsaw and cut them in half and jokingly said, "Oh, look at this magic trick." And me as a young kid who didn't have confidence in myself, who didn't understand what it even looked like to be, an adult or whatever it might be. I mean, again, I was a kid. I was a 13, 14-year-old kid. I didn't have what it took to mention anything to my parents or my father or to the school, anything. I just took the disrespect. You have good men now who are doing nothing wrong, being walked all over, not being treated as people. I'll tell you something right now. If that was my son or daughter, which is my point, that good, decent men are going to stand up for the women in their life. They're not going to want them to go around dressing like that because they care. They're not going to want them going out to nightclubs and raves and those kind of places because they care about them. It's not about control. That has nothing to do with it. They've convinced women that acting in those ways is somehow empowering. It's the complete opposite. It is the complete opposite. But my point being with this example, if I was a father and that happened to a son of mine or a daughter of mine, and I heard about that, I would do, of course, anything within reason. Nothing that's going to get me in trouble, of course. But to put it up front, there would have been a form of consequence for doing something like that, because I'm not going to tolerate disrespect towards me, towards people I see that are friends, family. I'm not going to do it. And I'm tired of seeing good men get disrespected and not treated like people. I'm tired of seeing it. I'm tired of seeing people get walked all over, get openly disrespected. Like I go to like a local Costco, and it's just, you look at just the body language, and especially men who are, assumingly married or in relationships, and it's just something else. It's something else. Again, like with the comment earlier about the support beam society, you take a sledgehammer and you hit the support beam society, what do you think is going to happen? Do you think people are going to want to work and have incentive? It's already gone bad enough. But I want to make a point here is that if you've ever felt like you're not good enough, if you ever had society try to box you in, whether it was when you were in school and you were being sat with the troublemakers, or you've been told what you can and can't do, or you had in this situation, like I mentioned, with a high school teacher do something like that and disrespect you and destroy your property. Do not let them break you. Do not let them box you in. Do not let them tell you what you can and can't do. And do not let them make you feel like you're any less of a person. Because I've seen way too much of that. I've seen way too many men who are defeated. I've seen way too many people who are not calling this kind of stuff out.